Now, when somebody mentions a game made by a YouTuber, you probably start thinking about cash grab mobile games or NFT scams. So when I saw a fairly competent looking Milsim shooter coming from an influencer, I thought, well, that's unusual. That said, of course, influencers play tons of games, so if they also have a good mind for design, there's a chance of a good game coming from someone who is deep into their specific genre. And Operation Harsh Doorstop is a game made by YouTuber Blue Drake 42 and his game studio Drakeling Labs. It's a free-to-play early access tactical FPS currently available on Steam with workshop support, a free modding STK, community-hosted servers, single player with bots, 3 different eras of war, and more. The game has a big emphasis on modding, with mod features built right into the main menu, and it seems to feature most of the basic game modes that you would expect from a tactical shooter like Conquest Assault. Vehicles are not yet in the game, but the developers are apparently hard at work getting those ready so that they can be implemented to reduce some of the travel times around the maps. And in many ways, the game looks like an early prototype of the well-known Milsim shooter Squad, which isn't totally fair in the sense that if you're trying to create a realistic military shooter, it's probably going to end up looking similar to other realistic military shooters, but nonetheless, the game looks and feels a lot like Squad, at least an early version of Squad. And on paper anyway, there does seem to be quite a few features here, especially for an entirely free project, which doesn't seem to have any sort of microtransaction economy. At the moment, donations seem to be the main method for supporting the project. So you could think of it as like one of the lowest barriers for entry to get into the Milsim FPS genre right now, especially compared to the top dogs on Steam like Squad or Hell Let Loose or Insurgency Sandstorm. If you've never played a Milsim before and aren't sure about dropping some money on it, Operation Harsh Doorstop may seem like it's the best point of entry. Now, upon joining my first match, the engine ran fine, though your experience may vary depending on your ping to servers and potentially the number of players allowed in the server. The game is optimized for 64 players but supports more than 100 with some potential latency issues. That said, I didn't really notice too many issues when in 100 player servers, though I'm not sure what percentage of them were players versus bots. And there will be a ton of bots in the lobbies that you play simply because the player population isn't big enough yet to start filling up 100 player servers on the reg. The base gunplay does feel competent. All the guns have appropriately snappy or sluggish handling based on their type without feeling like pure arcade weapons or super hardcore Milsim at the same time. A nice balance in my opinion. And apparently there's already some pretty diverse mods for the game, considering that it's only been out for several weeks. And even though that the game is intended as more of a tactical FPS, there's clearly support for different genres and styles of gameplay from the mod community. There's a real-time strategy mod in the works. Another developer's making an entire experience that's set on Mars. There's wave survival mods, like one based on Starship Troopers, where you have to survive a bug onslaught. And then there's some other basic stuff like third-person mode. However, all that said, in its current state, I wouldn't really call it the best initiation to the Milsim genre. What the game's developers have provided is a rudimentary tactical FPS experience that lacks, well, frankly, polish, innovation, presentation, and many features offered by its competition. It currently has 3 main eras of conflict: World War II, Vietnam, and sort of a Gulf War modern military theater of war. And while it's cool to see such a broad scope of content available, the game doesn't exactly excel at any of them, so they all kind of feel more or less like the same experience, just with different guns or maps. Plus, being an early access title, it does have quite a few bugs and cheaters that can get in the way of the actual immersion, which is an important element of any Milsim game. Now again, the devs are working on optimizing the game, fixing bugs, and dealing with cheaters, but if you are getting into it right now, you should expect to see quite a few rough areas. Now frankly, this does sound pretty typical from an early access indie game. However, I was having a hard time trying to understand the actual goal for the game, especially considering its free-to-play design without an obvious financial model. I watched a couple of review videos from people who seem to be much more familiar with the project critique the game's lack of direction and general basic or even poor presentation. And I just kept wondering, well, what exactly is the angle of this game if there's already some really successful Milsims in both the modern and World War II theaters of war that are pretty well liked by the community? And how is this project supposed to make money and continuous development if it's totally free to play? Well, one of the nice things about Blue Drake being the lead on the whole project is that I was just able to message him and ask. He was more than willing to break down his work on the game and vision for its future, and I think one of the more surprising things to learn was that the actual dev team is fully paid and that they're using early access as a testbed really to help improve the game and collect data. There's also other sources for funding within the company, and the donations also play a significant role in the development funds. Now, apparently they have a long-term goal for the game, and it's ultimately to create a Milsim that can both stand on its own next to games like Squad or Hell Let Loose, while also offering a Garry's Mod level of customization and tools for people to make their own Milsim experiences. The Garry's Mod of Milsims, if you will. And while there's already some pretty cool mods for games like Squad and certainly Arma, I think this game is trying to make it both easier for the average person to modify the game and give more control so that players can just easily set up custom missions and scenarios. And I can see how this concept would come from the mind of a content creator, wanting to have lots of scenarios, opportunities for interesting missions and gameplay events would make great YouTube content in theory. And while I think this concept is neat, I think the idea behind it is easily lost when you actually launch into the game. Most gamers are used to an early access title being more feature complete and looking somewhat like a final product, which clearly Operation Harsh Doorstop is not. And frankly, it looks like it's years away from where most games would probably consider launching. And I do think that this hurts the initial perception of the game, as it's hard to get excited about a project that doesn't quite feel like something unique. But according to Blue Drake, things are actually going better than expected, and the data that they're getting from players is helping them dial in a lot of the early engine problems to get things to a better state before continuing on with the rest of development. So while this really strategy might be considered unusual within the bigger game development world, within the indie dev world, anything that helps development can and should be done. With big budget games, you probably wouldn't employ a strategy like this, as the initial perception would hurt launch sales, but with something this small and also free, it's possible that the game will simply continue to improve and gain a following as it does so. Nonetheless, it's hard to recommend playing Operation Harsh Doorstop in its current state, as it's really something that feels like it's waiting on Phase 2, or maybe Phase 5 in this case, before it becomes something worth putting your time into. That said, I'll certainly be keeping an eye on it to see if any big updates change things. Some of the biggest games ever have come from the modding community, so I certainly wouldn't count this one out. It's just usually a case where those games are built off of big game communities or launched with new and unique ideas to begin with. I'm not too familiar with games that started off with more basic concepts and slowly evolved into something more interesting, but at the same time, the Milsim gaming community is unusual compared to the rest of the market. Games like Arma thrive because the mods make them better than what they were to begin with. The desire to simulate realistic battles drives people to play and support projects that allow them to create the battles that they specifically want. I'd be curious to hear what you guys think about this project, especially if you're a Milsim fan. Are there any specific elements that you're excited about, and do you think the game will one day be able to stand up with the big kids on the Milsim block? Next up, check out this video of playing Squad with Operator Drewski. This Milsim has been around for a long time and has really evolved into something quite special over the years. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll catch you next time. This is Level Cap, signing off.